Today, our topic will be on user management and role permissions. So, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to start with the presentation. So, uh, how we think about identity roles and permissions is very important for us. So, if you don't have role-based access or permissions management, then it means that you are not implementing any security or anything. Anybody can access anything and anybody can do whatever they wanted to. So for stopping that, we have implemented some RBAC management tool into our infrastructure. So something called as user management, we are using it. It is a user management API we have deployed into our environment, and that is connected to this UI, which is called as RBAC management. So if you go to this URL, you will able to see these sections: roles, permissions, me, role permissions, and user roles. So how this will work together, I will show you in a while. So basically, first problem that we need to identify that one identity would have multiple permissions, multiple things, multiple services, right? And to scale it up, this like it is going to create a lot of issues for it. So how we are going to manage those permissions and those roles into a scalable and into a proper manner? So for that, we are using this tool, role-based access management tool, which allow us to tie up multiple permissions into a single role. Why are we building this? So basically a single user and permission management service powering every humanized IQ service. So if you have used our APIs or if you have used secure chat, so you will see that it is calling a me endpoint. So if I go to suppose www.greatest.humanizeiq/secure chat, and if I open my network tab, it's not showing. All right. Me endpoint. So here it is taking the user ID and all of the roles what has user has, and then based on the user ID, which model it is mapped to, and it is sending the response. Okay. And if you go to the another application, suppose RBAC only, if I go to the network tab, and if I refresh it, you will see that for verify after verifying access, it will show my name automatically here, and you will see that it calls an me endpoint. If I go to that me endpoint, you will see my user ID, my email, my Firebase UID, which we will use, which we will are using for logging purposes, and then you will see my company name and company ID. And below that, you will see the roles which I have and the all the permissions which I have. And below that also, you can see which model I can access to. So ChatGPT latest, Gemini latest, Quen latest, and Trinity latest, and Trinity Mini latest, and Thinking latest. So how we are mapping those models to that particular user, how we are mapping these permissions to the particular user. So for that, you need to go to the user management database we were using in Cloudflare D1 SQLite. Okay. This is connected to the user management API. So if I open that slash API slash user management docs, here you can see that it will get all the users, and let me do this. 1 second, I will stop sharing my screen and authenticate by using XAPI key. So if I, you can see all of these endpoints, right? So for users endpoints, we have this user endpoint. If I try it out and execute it, it will fetch me all the users, whatever the UIDs are there, what is the email, first name, and all of those things. and it will fetch me the organization side. Same way, if I fetch another endpoint like RBAC endpoint, it will fetch me all the roles that users have and all of those things. Now, how this API is sending me these responses? This API is connected to the D1 database, which we are seeing here. Okay. So this API is getting the response from this database, and in this database, you will see different tables, right? So we have permissions table, then we have roles table, and then we have something called as roles permissions table. So in permissions, we have multiple permissions, and those permissions we are adding into the roles table. Okay, so I have created a multiple roles too. But how we are mapping these permissions to this role? So for that, we have roles permissions table. So when you go to the roles permissions table, you will see the role ID and permission ID. So based on the role ID, we are adding those permissions. So suppose to role ID 9, we are mapping a number 6 permission. So first we need to go to the permission and we need to find what is the 6th permission. 6th permission is Craft Studio deploy non-prod. Okay, and when I go to the roles, it is mapping to the 9 number role. What is 9? 9 is admin. So if somebody wants to add, if somebody wants to have that permission about Craft Studio, it only have an access for the admin roles. So whoever has the roles of admin, they are only able to execute that permission, which is deploy. So only admin can deploy the Craft Studio in the non-production environment. No other individual user can deploy it. And how we are mapping it? We are mapping it with the role model table. Same way for the AI models, we have app model. So this app model is mapping the applications with the model IDs. This model IDs is coming from model configurations table. So here you can see different models we have added. A local llama, Claude, and Anthropic Gemini, and all of those models have been added. So in order to provide the access for these models, we are mapping to for the applications, we are using app models. So one application, you can see we are using one app ID. What is the one? One is secure chat. If I go here, you can see one is Aura Secure Chat. So Aura Secure Chat will have what are the models that Aura Secure Chat have? These are the models that Aura Secure Chat will have. And in the drop down, if you go there, you can see this number of models. So that's how it is able to give you these options, which you can see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if I go there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 6, 7, 8. Right, there is one model. 7. I guess one model isn't been added into the configuration, but yeah, pretty much that's how it worked. So whatever the model you are going to add and whatever the ID, app ID you are going to give, it is going to map that model with that particular application. And if you want to map the user to that model, so that has role model database. So based how the permissions, you are going to add the permissions into this database, and then you are going to create a role for those permissions. Then you need to use this role permissions table to map the permissions to a single role. So moving forward, one identity record access, Humanize IQ, Craft Studio, E-Team, App Builder, Work Management, auto registration on first login. So if some of you see that for some of our applications, you don't need to register to, like for Gitti also, if you have a humanizeIQ.com mail or if you have a humanizeIQ.ai mail, you can just sign in with those and it will automatically create an account for you. You don't need to register with your name and all of those things. So that thing is connected to the Firebase. What Firebase will does, Firebase will search, okay, this user belongs to this organization. And if it belongs to that organization, it will create a user ID for the users and it will allow you to log in into the application. Moving forward, we are using this technologies. So for runtime environments, we are using Cloudflare Workers, Hono.js, HTTP framework, TypeScript end-to-end, Firebase authentication, identity and delivery, we are using Firebase authentication and Gitti actions. environments, we have playtest, dev, prod for our, and for e-team, we have e-team production. We have D1 database and R2 storage for per environment. Platform URLs, you have known about it. And this is the authentication which we are using. So if I go to any API, suppose here, you can see here when you authorize, you can see different types of authentication. Either you can use XAPI key or cookie auth or studio auth. And there are many more, but we are using mostly 3 to 4 authentication methods. Any of it, or you can authenticate. Either you can use XAPI key or cookie. If you want to authenticate, you can use cookie. This will use your encrypted cookie, and this will use your base 64 encoded encrypted cookie. So these two are different authentication method. Okay, and here also you can see how it is going to take it. So XAPI key, it is going to use it as an header. Cookie, it is going to take it as an cookie, and studio cookie auth, it is going to take as an query parameter string. So these are the methods, and these are the authentication various things which we are using it. And moving forward, I showed you the database table. So we have user data, roles, permissions, and how it is tied up. User is tied up to roles, roles is tied up to permissions, and organizations is going to the connected to the organizations table. So that's how everything is connected to each other and everything is mapped to each other. Auto registration flow. So there is something called as auth decrypt cookie, which we are using it. So if you authorize it, it has in some Firebase, it is using a decrypt cookie. Suppose you are sending a request to an API. How does it know that this user is sending that request? So basically, it sends an cookie value or some string to that decrypt cookie, and that decrypt cookie endpoint will decrypt the endpoint and decrypt that request and tell you, okay, this is the user and this is the name of the user, this is the email of the user, and all of those things. So if you see here in the network call, if I reload the page, it will verify the access, it will call the me endpoint, and it will show me the response in the me endpoint. Okay. So if you see this information, cookie at the message, you can see cookie decrypted successfully. So it sent the cookie, and that cookie is decrypted by this endpoint, which it is called as this /auth/decrypt and save. So what it does, it will take that cookie and decrypt that cookie, and it will pass the information to the API key. This is the user and this is the user's credentials which the user is using. And then it will call the Firebase login with that. And then Firebase will verify it and authenticate that particular user. So that's how it works. So get RBAC me is a single bootstrap call that hydrates the entire front end, returns the user, the roles they hold, and the set of permissions those roles grant. So RBAC me will tell me my all roles and my all permissions. RBAC/me/permissions will tell me the permissions, and RBAC/me/roles will tell me the roles with their permission names. So these are the three different sub endpoints we are using for debugging purposes. The use permission hook is like we are reads the permissions from the auth context, and let me show you in a better way. So this is the UI. Here, if I go to the me endpoint, this is basically going to call the me endpoint, and here you can see what are the roles have been assigned to me, and here you can see what are the permissions is connected to that role. Okay, so I have assigned CS DevOps, CS developers, RBAC admin, and user. By default, if any one of you log in into RBAC or any APIs, you will get this role. If you need to have a privileges actions or privileges permissions, then you will assign to different roles based on your needs. So this roles is connected to this permissions, which means that I can access Craft Studio, I can access all of the organizations, I can assign to anyone, any department, I can deploy it in anywhere, any production, dev, prod, non-prod, and all of those things. I can edit the task, I can read, write, view, whatever the permissions you are looking here, I can do all of those things. Okay. And there is a entries called as all. If I gave you the all, then you will have all the permissions. So that permission will belongs to an super admin. So if I give all permissions to anybody who is an super admin or something like that, it will have all the permission which is there in the RBAC tool. So whenever you code, don't tie your code with roles, tie your code with permissions. So suppose if you are writing a code, right? You don't need to change your front end, or you don't need to change anything into your code. You just need to tie up your code with the permissions. So you guys have created a API for your Cloudflare assignment, and that assignment can be read by anyone and can be accessed by anyone. But what if we want to prohibit it that access to only our organization's people or only a limited amount of people? So how you are going to do that? So first, what you are going to do, you are going to create 3 to 4 different roles. Okay. So the basic 4 roles that you are going to create is read, view role, right? Edit role, delete role, and add, right? Add, view, read, and delete. That is the role you are going to create it, and the most role which you are going to use it is view and edit. Okay. So whenever you do that, you can see here we have different permissions and different roles, but you can see there are only 4 roles and there are multiple permissions attached, right? So what you want to do, we have already different roles. What you can do is either you can create a new role, or if it can be used by an existing role, you can just create a new permission and just tie it up to that role. So I have this user role, right? So which means user role should have read access to everything basically. So if you create and read permission for your application and you will just add that permission to this role, you don't need to change anything into your code. I will automatically able to read your APIs. So are you getting my point? You just need to create the permission and you just need to assign that permission to this role. And let me get back. So if you want to create an permission or if you want to create a role, how you are going to do it? So basically you can go to the permission here and you can add any permission, okay? And you can give any description about it. So this is 25 permissions we have already added it. And if I want to edit one more permission, I can add a permissions. View read only, I can give a name read APIs support. Paste, copy, paste, select app, which app I want to use. So you need to have an app registered here. So you can select that app and you can deploy for that app. So suppose task manager I am using it. And you can use a custom name also. So basically it will create a permission based on the naming convention which we are using, or you can use custom name if you want to bypass the structure, but I heavily recommend don't use that. So it will create a role like this, task underscore manager read APIs view. Once I clicked on the permissions, it will create that permissions for me. It is task. Yeah. So here you can see the permission. It has created that permission to me, right? Now what I am going to do it basically is, this is part. I am going to go back. I am going to go to the roles, and in the roles, I can add a new role like task underscore manager. Once I add it, is added task manager. And then I will go back. I will map the permission to the role. I will go to the role permissions, and here I will able to see roles. So task manager, right? I need to go to the edit, and I can select any of the permissions which is already existed, or I can select the permission which I have created, and I can add it, and it will add it for me. So that simple. You can add the roles to you can add the permissions to that role, and you can give that role to any of the user. That is how simple it is. But in order to make it work, make sure that your backend knows about this permission. So in your backend you need to add that if the user has this permission, task manager API view, the same permission which I have created, then the user should be able to read these things, and it shouldn't be able to do any of the other things. It's just only view mode. So if you have that into your backend, then only it is going to work. So that's how you are going to do this. Never map any roles, because role can be changed at any time, right? Permissions will be same: view, read, edit, delete. That is the 4 major permissions that you are going to use. So make sure whenever you write a code, it should be tied up with the permissions, not with the role. And then you can use those permissions to create to map with the any of the roles that you need. Understood till here? So then this me endpoint which you are seeing, it is going to show you your roles and permissions which you have. And if you want to see other users' roles or permissions, you can go to the user roles, and you can see different users, and you can see the different roles which they have. So if I can check any of the users and I can check any of the roles, I can manage their roles. And if I want to provide any of a different role, I can provide a different role. Suppose I have created a new role, I can add that role and I can provide to any of the users. So if that role you want to provide to the different users, you can add it from there. So this is how we are managing our role-based accesses from this tool. So as I showed you, these are the permission registry which we are using. Default permissions is user, so basic platform access you will get. Then there is something called as CS access permission. If you have this permission, you will able to access Craft Studio. If you have CS access all organization, you will able to view all the organization. Same way, if you have assigned to department or assigned to anyone, you can assign task to anybody or to any department. And if you have CS deploy prod or non-prod permission, you can deploy through Craft Studio in non-prod or prod. Basically, you will not have these permissions. Only a DevOps person would have this permission, so they can be able to deploy your stuffs into the non-prod and production. Then we have request prod and request non-prod deploy. So if you want, you will have this permission. So if you want to deploy something, you will use this permission to raise a request. Then for approving the component, we have this permissions and so on. And if you use the all, it will work as a wildcard entry, and it will give you all of the permissions together, like a super admin access. Then these are the roles which we are using. User roles is assigned on first login, as I've told. Admin is a general administrator which have full role access, and super admin will have full system accesses. Organization admin, we have different organizations. So we have E-team, we have Humanize IQ, and so on. So organization admin will have the access for that organization. So if we have some applications which is deployed for E-team, so we have or E-team admin. So only E-team admin people only able to see and work only for their tools. They will not able to work for our tools. For our tools, we have Humanize IQ admin. And if they are super admin, they have full system access. So either they can interact with E-team applications also, or they can interact with Humanize IQ applications also. CS, wherever you see this CS as in prefix, This CX stands for Craft Studio. So basically, Craft Studio super admins, Craft Studio organization admins, DevOps, QA, developers, and project approvers. So these are the complete role registry that we have, and these are the authentication endpoints this RBAC endpoints has. So as I told you, we are using different types of authentication, and health endpoint we are using to check the status whether the API is alive or not, and whether the API is responding or not. Then we have an auth validate. Auth validate will tells you whether you are a validate user or not. Once you send that auth cookie to that this endpoint decrypt and save, it will pass the information which company you are belong to and what is the email ID and basic credentials for you, Firebase ID and all of those things. And if you call the me endpoint, it will check first by decrypting your identity, and then it will check what are the roles and permissions you have, and it will return those permissions and roles to you. Same way these other things will work. Get will get the roles, delete will delete the roles, post will post that roles and permissions. So all of these endpoints which you are seeing in the RBAC, we have created a UI for it. So you don't need to use an API. You can just visit to this URL and you can use these things to manage your roles, permissions, and me endpoints and all of those things. Moving forward, these are the example of the API which is using. So app builder, if you use Craft Studio, there is an app builder API endpoint which is using RBAC to manage the permissions and roles. Then work management API, which you use for creating your task, that is also using the RBAC tool. So how a front-end app bootstraps. So user visits any humanized IQ and sign in via Firebase. Then app call the auth decrypt and save endpoint to ensure a user data record exists. So if you are a new user, you newly joined Humanize IQ, right? You do not have any credentials yet. What it is going to do is I will give you a mail ID with humanizeIQ.com, but the data doesn't know what does it mean, right? It needs to have an user ID for an user. It needs to have an mail ID for that user and all and so on. So what it will do, it will pass the cookie to the decrypt API endpoint which I have showed you, and that decrypt API endpoint will pass you your user ID and all of those things accordingly. So on yesterday's session, if you know, you were Rajiv showed you one endpoint. Let me do it in front of you. So if I do, there is an auth endpoint. So if you click on that, yeah, can you see 200 success auth? It will pass the email ID. What is the email ID? Firebase UID, last name, first name. So it is also using the same thing. It is passing the cookie. Cookie you can see here. If you don't know, I will share you. So cookie, if you go to the applications, you can see an cookie in auth. Okay. This is the cookie. Whenever you go to this endpoint or you go to something different endpoints or something like that, it is going to pass this cookie and it is going to decrypt this cookie and share the information. Okay, this is the username, this is the Firebase ID, this is the first name and last name, this is the company ID and all of those things. So based on the cookie, it is going to pass the cookie to the decrypt endpoint, and decrypt endpoint will going to decrypt these things and going to show you the records, what are the things you have. And if you don't have it, you can on the first login, it is automatically check the records. If the record is not exist, it will create those records for you. For permission naming convention, as you have seen for Graph Studio, we are using CS underscore as a prefix. For project planner, we can use PP. For platform wide, no prefix needs to be given, and all is for wildcard entries. So example is CS underscore deploy underscore prod, which means Graph Studio deploy prod. PP approve project, which means project planner approve project. And if it is applicable to all, we can just create a role as a default underscore permission. It doesn't need to have any prefixes. 4 environments, 1 identity, permission driven. So a scenario, as I explained, adding a new role. So what are the steps whenever you want to add a new role, right? So step 1 is to create a migration script and insert the role and insert into the role permissions. You can either create a migration script and run directly in the database, or we have a front end for it. If you do it in the front end also, it will do the same thing. Okay, so either you can do from the front end, or either you can create a migration script and directly do it from the database. Then step 2 is the zero front end changes. You don't need to do any front end changes. You need to just check like whether in the backend you have these permissions into the code or not. If it is there, then it will work. Then you just need to assign the users to that single role, and it will be able to get those permissions automatically. No front end deployment, no code review for permission, nothing at all. You can change role at any point of time. The permission will be same. The only thing it's going to be change the roles. So you can create a new roles, or you can edit those roles, and you can map any number of permissions you want to map it. So preference system, user ID, we have user ID, we have app ID like Craft Studio, object ID will be project 42, and what is the object type. So these are the things that should be there in an API request, which user is requesting, send a request. So it should have an user ID, it should have an app ID for which app it is sending that request, and it should have object ID and object type if it is needed. Schema, I have explained you earlier too. So the key architectural principles is single source of truth, one user management API, every app calls RBAC me. So every app is tied to this RBAC management tool, and every app is going to call that tool to know what are the users and permissions you have. And permissions are stable, permissions are static. Okay, so you can't change permissions at permissions are static things. So if you're changing the permissions, then you need to change those permissions in the backend also. So usually people don't change permissions, usually only change the roles. So roles are the configurable things. Write has permission, never has role. Okay. Auto registration, new users get the organization defined role ID on the first login. The same migration which you are going to run or which you are going to add in front end, you can do it in the playtest. The same thing you are going to do it in the dev and prod and 18 prod also. All is a wildcard entry. So make sure that whenever you are using it for the right person. Don't use it for each and every person, because not every person should have all the accesses. 3 auth modes which we are using. One as a middleware, XAPI key, XStudio cookie for all permissions. I have explained you that because the roles are dynamic and the permissions are static. So for the granularity purposes, it is always better to code only permissions instead of. I have shown you all the API endpoints across RBAC and how work management or Craft Studio is using that API. So please provide the feedback if you like this session, and if you have any doubts, you can raise your hand and one by one you can clear the doubts to me. Any doubts? It's a very complicated topic. I am expecting you guys have many doubts. Yeah, Rishika.
As you said, creating roles and setting the permissions, so these can be created by the admin or the user also.
What? Can you repeat again?
Uh, like if you showed you can create roles and add the permissions. So I'm asking, a user can create it or only the admin has the access for it?
Yeah, so user can also create the roles, but user can create roles and permissions both. So they have the ability to create the roles and permissions, but for mapping it or for mapping those things, I think you don't have the permission. You need to go to the admin level accesses to map those permissions. Because if you have the permissions to map, you can map any permission to any role, and that is not a good thing. So you can create multiple roles and multiple permissions, but to map those, you should have admin privileges. The thing is that this is very first time, and I can understand it is very difficult to know these things and understood these things at the very first go. So it's better if you I will share the links with you about for the PPT recording links also, and I will also share you some of the APIs which is using this. So what I want you to do is go to that APIs and see how these APIs have those structures, those permissions into their backend, and how it is calling and how it is working together. So once you review those things, then you will get an idea how these things works, and then you will have some doubts about it. So check the existing repos too. Like don't only review PPTs and recordings, checks the existing repositories which is using RBAC tool and see how it is working behind the scene. Okay. So one of the tool which you see secure chat, Aura secure chat is also using it. So I have showed you the app model and model ID, right? So this models you are seeing here, it is coming from app model. Okay. So if you go to the app model, you can see the model ID and app ID. In app ID, if you see this apps 111, one is for applications. If I go to the applications, it is for Aura secure chat, which means Aura secure chat will have this models. This model suppose 16. If I go to the model config, what is the 16 model I am seeing here? 16 is chat GPT latest, which means I will be able to see chat GPT latest here. Understood? So this is how all those things work. So you have different applications, different models, right? So there will be a different table. There will be a different table for applications, and there will be a different table for models. And then there will be a third table which will map those models to an application. Same way for the users, roles, and permissions too. We have a different users, we have a different permissions, and we have a different roles. Then there will be have a we have a see different users, data, roles, and permissions. Then if you see, we are mapping it role to the permissions and user to the roles. So I will share the link with you. I think you will need some time to understand these things. This is a very complicated thing, so I can understand it. Review it once. Once you will have a doubt, reach out to me, and I will happy to solve those questions and solve those doubts.